Hi everyone, I'm Jack at Intersect, and I'm joined today by Pi Lanningham at Sundae Labs. We're going to be talking today about treasury management, treasury oversight, how we got here, where we are right now, what does the future look like, and also how does it compare to other ecosystems potentially, and how we're managing this, in the new world we're in with on-chain governance. So maybe we'll start actually, Pi, with actually just a bit of background about Sundae Labs.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Pi, like the number. I'm the CTO at Sundae Labs. We built the first AMM DEX on Cardano. And since then, we've really expanded into being kind of a dev shop. We build a lot of infrastructure across Cardano. We're working on Amaru, Acropolis, building stuff with Midnight. So people always tell me I've got my fingers in everything.
Yeah, you do, yeah. Actually, and in some ways, that's been really beneficial and we're getting into the detail a little bit here, but the smart contract framework that we're using right now for treasury management is also shared by Amaru, like you said. So it's really great. We're unifying a process here for managing treasury funds.
Absolutely.
So maybe how did that start, actually? How did the connection with Amaru, with Intersect, obviously IO as well, were a big part of this?
Yeah, so I mean, my part of the story, maybe you can fill in the parts before this, but my part of the story is one day Cerberus reached out to me, and they said, I was talking to Charles, and he said, you're building these smart contracts. We want to help you build a dashboard for that. I was like, we are? And so I got in touch with Charles, and he told me, we really want to have the treasury funds not managed by a multi-sig. We want to show why we're building on crypto.
Yeah.
Right? And we want to build a set of smart contracts that, have that multi-sig management capabilities, but provide additional guards and transparency so that, this is a big responsibility that the community has entrusted with these funds, and we want to do right by that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is really important now, given the fact that we're, investing as an ecosystem. What's been approved right now is 255 billion, give or take, ADA out of the Treasury in this first run, which is a huge, significant investment into the ecosystem, which is really encouraging.
Yeah.
Really exciting.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to how Intersect have played this role, and I think what's unique about Cardano is we have this idea or concept of an administrator. And that is unique to every other L1. There is nothing like that exists in a sort of codified way on the Constitution, at least. And when it comes to being an Intersect as an administrator for these 255 million contracts right now, and I think that, for me, necessitates a highly accountable and highly transparent system, which you've obviously developed now and we're using. And more so, I think, with the unilateral side of stuff, right? I never wanted Intersect to have unilateral control of anything here. So I'm very happy that I'm one signature, if you like, of many.
Yeah.
And I can't do anything on my own, which is fantastic. So I'm really pleased that we've rolled it out the way we have. And it's been really tried and tested. Maybe we could talk a bit more about sort of the structure of the contract, how it's going to look and feel for people.
Yeah.
And, what can they expect when they go and look at it on chain?
Yeah. So these sets of smart contracts are basically the minimal, simplest thing that we could build that meets the requirements in the time that we had. And so, maybe later we'll talk about where we want to go from there. But what they do is, DREPs vote on the Treasury withdrawal actions. And those funds, if the Treasury action is ratified and enacted, go into the reward account. And that reward account is just like, anybody earning staking rewards, right? That they track kind of a bucket of funds. But in this case, instead of being, the stake address attached to your wallet, it's a smart contract. And the smart contract says you are allowed to withdraw these funds if you meet these criteria. And the criteria is you have to pay them into the same contract, right? And so then they're locked in this contract. And it creates this like hermetically sealed system where from the point of it being held in the Cardano treasury by the ledger to it being managed on chain, there's never any intermediate custody. We withdrew it to a wallet and then have to send it to the smart contract. So that's really, really clean and elegant. From there, that kind of bucket of funds, we call the treasury contract, can be used to fund different kind of vendor projects. And we call those, either projects or the vendor contract. Those have somebody who is kind of entitled to claim those rewards, along with or not rewards, but payments, along with a payment schedule. So, first of every month, this much is gonna mature, we say. And by default, we assume that everything's going well if nobody stepped in, just so that, vendors need to get paid, they need to pay payroll. And so they can come in each time one of those payments matures, and they can claim those funds. However, the real world's messy, and so if there's kind of a dispute over whether the work for those funds has been done, you, and I'll explain who you is in a second, can come in and pause some or all of those milestones, and can say, hey, we didn't receive the invoice in time, or like, you accidentally uploaded your dry cleaning bill, not the proof of completion, and so we need to pause the payout so that if it matures while it's paused, the vendor can no longer claim that payout. And then, there's a separate process to go back and forth. Oh, okay, yeah, here's the right file, like that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then you, again, I'll get to that in a second, can unpause it. Now, who is you? You consists of basically the contracts support an arbitrary native script or an actual programmable script. So it's actually quite flexible if people want to reuse it and put smart contract logic on, who is allowed or under what conditions you're allowed to pause and resume. Maybe somebody wants to use these contracts, but they want to say, hey, you can't pause it within the last 48 hours, right? You need to pause it well in advance. Somebody can add that condition in.
Yeah.
For Intersect's deployment, there's kind of a complex set of permissions that make sure that Intersect, is a participant in that action, because you guys, at the end of the day, are legally. I don't know. I don't want to do anything, but you guys, Intersect has a liability there, and then the funding of the contracts is gated by a diverse set of entities. So Sundae Labs, Cerberus, Endmaker,
the Cardano Foundation, and Dequadrant.
Yeah. And so in order to fund a project in the first place and set up that payment schedule, Intersect can't go and do that. They have to get kind of the consensus of that group of organizations. And that makes sure that those organizations are reviewing to make sure that the will of the DREPs is being satisfied. Mm-hmm. Maybe talk about how this has been so complicated on the legal side of things.
Yeah, I think, and this is what makes Cardano actually very unique, and the role of the administrator within the Constitution unique, because whilst we have this tons of safeguards and the accountability and transparency, which is super necessary, which you've developed, and I'm pleased we're using, that's backed up and sort of mirrored by these legal traditional wet contracts, if you like, which we're signing with every vendor that's approved. And I think that's really, it's really impactful, because we need to have those classic arbitration routes in case of disputes where we can then, we've paused payment, and if it's challenged by the vendor, we can pursue those routes, right? Mm-hmm. The idea is, of course, to mitigate that, and the contracts are very, in fact, you can go and see the contracts. They're transparent online now. You can go to Intersect's knowledge base and see the boilerplate contracts, so you can see how we're interpreting it. And importantly, my role at Intersect is to make sure that whatever the work that was approved by DREPs is in the true spirit of what is actually delivered.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the oversight committee and the roles that the other signers play in the oversight, the smart contract, support that spirit as well.
Yeah.
So it's really mirrored, it's like for like. I think what's also really important is that all the milestones and the payment schedules will be visible, right? Mm-hmm. So you can see, IOE are due to get a maturity here, and this is what they're delivering next week. And that's really cool.
Yeah.
We've not had that before.
Yeah.
And that's going to be across, obviously, currently, I think 30 proposals have passed, which is amazing, out of 39 that we've had.
Yeah. So that's actually another thing that we built, right? So we basically built three things as part of this. There was the smart contracts, then this metadata standard. So I'm the original author of SIP 100, which is how, the vote rationales and the governance action metadata, the description of what it is, gets recorded in a machine consumable document. And the focus of SIP 100 was really this notion of flexible, extensible, evolving metadata. We don't know what we're going to need to express. And so that standard is built to be really flexible.
Yeah.
And so anybody can come along and just define their own new field that they need, right? And you don't have to go through a lengthy SIP process. And it's really focused on being interconnected, right? When you put a governance proposal on chain, it needs to reference a budget or a feasibility report. And so in the vision for SIP 100 is, we have all of these documents that are referencing each other, kind of creating basically, a hypertext of Cardano governance.
Yeah.
And so we leveraged that standard for the metadata that's attached to each transaction. And it describes, the smart contract describes the behavior. Okay, it unlocks on this date. It can be claimed by this vendor. But that data isn't machine consumable. The address that you see in the datum doesn't mean anything to anybody, right?
Yeah.
And so the metadata is our way to make sure that that's transparent to the Cardano community. And that address, that's IOG. These milestones, right? It's like 600,000 ADA, 600,000 ADA, 600,000 ADA. What is each milestone for? What's the description? What's the completion criteria? And we took a little bit of inspiration from Catalyst from that actually. So it's like this feedback loop and things like that.
Yeah.
So,
and actually, talking a bit about the vision of how we see this rolling out, I think it's a good time to pivot that to there. There's we've done this MVP, which is actually pretty thorough. It's pretty already a good MVP. But what do you expect next? What do you think we could start to look at as an ecosystem for how we want to start to do this? At maybe a greater scale or a greater pace, a bunch of different things, or in just fact, I guess diversifying and just having a bit of fun with it as well, right? Like what can we do as an ecosystem?
Yeah. So Sundae Labs and Intersect have already started that conversation and kind of figuring out, hey, this was rebuilt under a really tight time crunch, which meant it very limited what we could do. If we have a full year to build out this platform, what does that look like? And we've got some really cool ideas. First off, there's some things that I would like to fix that we realized kind of late. In particular, the biggest kind of usability constraint right now is that this oversight committee has to sign the transaction, and you can't project a transaction too far in the future because of a kind of subtle way that the node works that we discovered last minute. And so, we have 36 hours for everybody to come together to sign these transactions. Yeah. And so, that's easily solvable, but not, in a last minute change after the auditors have already reviewed everything and things like that. So we didn't go with it this time, but, hopefully we can make these contracts a lot more, focused on the UX for next year. We're also talking about more advanced things where you could say, hey, maybe there's a configurable approval hierarchy within Intersect where, somebody can say, well, we need to change this milestone. And so they kind of start that process on chain, and you can see the chain of approvals and who has signed off on that chain. Yeah. Some of the more ambitious ideas, it's, I think, a real big shame that, it was just too complicated legally for Intersect to figure out how to fit stablecoins into this narrative this year. And so there's a lot of vendors who are going to be taking on a lot of volatility risk for the ADA held in these contracts. And that, stems from a lot of things, the low liquidity in the ecosystem, the really tricky legal question that introduces.
And there's also many vendors that actually just want.
Yeah, absolutely.
They don't want stable.
Yeah. And so by next year, we really want to have basically a built-in OTC desk where the vendors that kind of want to de-risk can request that their funds be swapped into a stablecoin and allow the community to come and kind of make those exchanges. Say, hey, I'm willing to kind of take this part of the ADA in return for this stablecoin. And in that way, you can kind of alleviate some of the liquidity issues of going through a DEX and kind of crowdsource the exchange of that. And then, maybe the craziest idea that we have is basically building in invoice financing to the platform. So you have this problem where a small, scrappy startup who may be killer developers but is very cash poor, it's very hard for them to kind of deal with these month-to-month payments. They need to go and scale up their team. They need to and you don't want to just give them the money because then the Treasury bears the risk of what if they don't deliver.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
What we could do is build in an invoice financing platform where they could find on-chain somebody who's willing to underwrite that risk and say, hey, for 80 cents on the dollar or 90 cents on the dollar, and the exact size of the discount is basically a comment on their trust in that vendor's ability to deliver, right?
Yeah,
if it's a
tolerance.
Yeah, if it's a really reputable vendor, then maybe that's, they can negotiate that up really high. And if it's, if it's a brand new start, maybe they're taking a bit more of a haircut. But that allows the team to get that upfront capital that they need to make sure they're successful, while also making sure that the Treasury never bears that risk. If they don't deliver, it's the the private financier who ends up bearing that risk because they took on that thing. So, lots of questions on whether that's like legally viable and things like that. But we really want to explore that path because it's such a unique and creative thing that no other ecosystem is doing.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it only strengthens on what Cardano is doing now, right? Because we are pretty unique already. When I look at other ecosystems like Polkadot or Tezos, where they have already on-chain governance, they've got some of this stuff happening and they've got their own treasuries. There is a distinct difference on the oversight and management of, is what was funded the correct thing and has it been delivered to a good standard, right, to the right standard? And that's where Cardano is being incredibly unique here, not just with the smart contract payment schedules and that kind of thing, and the challenge is, you're right, that in the traditional legal sense, in the legal world, these are new things, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do we work out this? How we're invoicing in ADA, and it's with contracts denominated in ADA. How do we then translate that to a stablecoin portion for those that want to have some stablecoin stability? We are doing that with Twig, actually. That Twig's proposal in its entirety will be based in USDM and USDA. But we have to do a bit of there is a feature on the smart contract framework that allows us to do that, but it's not clean.
Yeah.
But we can do it, of course, and it's all traceable.
Yeah.
Good. So we are, I think this is a good point of now testing out how much stablecoin support do we need as a system and want in this framework.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see a lot of that. And you've done so actually with Amaru. We'll talk a little bit about that.
Sure, yeah. So we built these contracts kind of from an impetus, a need that both IO and Intersect came to us and said, hey, we need these, and we helped kind of design and then implement those contracts. But I'm one of the kind of members of the General Assembly of Pragma, which is an open source foundation building and pushing forward the Cardano ecosystem. And it was really important to us that, as great as the work that Intersect is doing, we want people to understand that Intersect isn't the be-all, end-all solution, right? And I'm sure you'd appreciate a lighter workload next year. And so we really went through the process of doing our own info action completely independent of the whole process that you built and our own treasury withdrawal. And we utilized these same smart contracts to show that they were reusable. We've actually, Matthias, K-Torz, has gone and extended the contracts with new features that were specific to Amaru. We're not using them right now because they haven't fully been audited, but we're using the same ones that we're using for Intersect for safety. Once those get audited, we're going to be able to show the upgrade capabilities of these contracts. And so it's just really cool to be a part of both of those projects and be able to bring them together while also showing the choice and diversity that is available in the ecosystem.
Yeah, I think that's what really I've liked about this whole process is, and you're right about Intersect being one of many, and that's the role that I want Intersect to start to play towards more as a sort of link coordinator and one of a few. And I think the administrator role is a very sort of undefined role, if we're frank about it, in the Constitution. And Amaru have their version and conversion of that administrator, which is perfectly constitutional, as do we, right? And can we open this up and make it easier for other administrators to come through? And actually shout out to Self-Driven. Mark Byers has stepped up as an administrator for his team under the Tempo vote, actually, right now.
Oh, wow.
So that's really cool. So we're starting to see some new administrators emerge. And what tooling can we provide as an ecosystem that's open and, just like we've done with Amaru and Intersect?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think from, the next, maybe I should lay out, just step back a second and lay out the sort of next steps we're going through right now because we're just in the middle of the process.
Yeah.
So as I said, 30 proposals have been now approved, 27 ratified, 33 enacted, so 30 total. And on the enacted ones, we're signing the contracts, the traditional legal contracts between the Cardano Development Holdings and Intersect, so we've got that sort of structure there. And then when now the money is visible and so you can see where it is now on the Treasury contract.
Yeah, it's actually held in the smart contracts today, which it's really funny. If this was a DeFi protocol, it'd be the biggest DeFi protocol on Cardano.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, look at the TVL there, right? Yeah, that's a good point. And so from there, we've got this pot of money now that has been approved for IOE, for Catalyst and Midgard. Those are the first three that have been enacted. Now that we're getting those contracts signed, we're going to start to build out the milestones, as you spoke about with the metadata, and get those vendor contracts, essentially the petition out of the Treasury Reserve contract, funded, and then work essentially commences with those vendors.
Yeah.
And then and as you said, you pulled on this before, Some milestones are monthly reporting, some of them may be quarterly, depends on the proposal itself, and that is worked out. DREPs did look at that and sort of worked out what the proposal would deliver and when, and then milestones have been translated into the contracts on both sides. And what will happen is that the vendor will need to provide a milestone report, and that could be a bunch of different things. It could be a demo, it could be, like if it's an event, it could be simple images of the event actually happening, and here's the registration details, here's the numbers, here's the KPIs that they promised to work on, right, and target. And then we'll be reviewing that as a delivery assurance team at Intersect to make sure that's been completed, it's accurate. We'll then share that with the community for their own, as part of the milestone approval or maturity. It will be shared with the community to do their own due diligence as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And decide if they want to fund that same vendor in the next
yeah, and I think, they're talking about that actually, because reputation is a big thing, right? And it's always a key thing in any new organization or just in general as a human beings, right? You sort of have to stand a bit on your reputation at all times, I guess. And other ecosystems have play on this reputation piece very strongly because they don't have strong oversight on the other end of funding.
Yeah.
And I think we know reputation is going to be big, especially the first year of doing this and seeing the cadence of reports coming in and the quality of the reports coming in. And, I think we'll get a really good sense of how this is feeling as an ecosystem in the months to come. But I think for me, the first steps really are just getting this moving. And it's nearly there. I'm really, I must admit, just as a sort of side note, quite impressed and surprised at the level of DREP engagement we've had on the 39 individual actions. You remember, Pi, we went through a heated debate with the community on how should we do this, right?
Yeah.
I think at the time I took on this new role as the interim ED here at Intersect, knowing I was sort of coming into a bit of a mess with the budget process. And I
should say, doing what we're doing, which is doing something that nobody has ever done before, is so incredibly hard, right? So I think it's, I've given you some private feedback, some pretty harsh feedback, but it's always in the spirit of like, what we're doing is really hard, and it's important that we get it right. And so, to those in the Cardano community that are providing that feedback, great. To those that are being like really caustic and, give me their heads, try to understand the scope and the uniqueness of what we're doing.
Yeah, and doing this in such a decentralized ecosystem like Cardano globally, like with languages and different interpretations, particularly when you're talking about money, right? Let's be honest about it.
Yeah.
Budgets make people's ear up because my cost tolerance is different to your cost tolerance from our cultural backgrounds and all of our professional life.
Absolutely.
And so it's really challenging to coordinate a budget like that for the ecosystem. I'm proud we've got to where we are today, and I'm glad as well that we've done the 39 individual ones. I think it was the right call to do it this time round, and I'm also really pleased that DREPs have responded the way they have, and fair play. They said it all along they would, right? And I always had faith. And so, this process will sort of close from an Intersect perspective on August the 17th is when the actions expire. And then from there, we'll be looking at how do we shape this up for next time round? What kind of coordination level does Cardano want from an ecosystem-wide budget? You mentioned the Amaru direct route, which is always really important to mention because we're a permissionless system. Yeah. Anybody can do this. And, selfishly, I was jealous of Christina and the team and you getting the action out. It's a very, I guess, in a respectfully simple and straightforward ask. It's quite low level value, in all respects compared to what we were doing. And it was clear that people liked what we were doing with the Rush node and everything was going on with node diversity.
It's kind of the way I look at it is we paved the way with something uncontroversial. Yeah. Right? Exactly. We showed that how the process works. People are getting to see how the smart contracts work. We got to put something less than 168 million in the smart contracts before we did it live, which gave me big relief. Maybe it's worth talking about what we did to make sure these contracts are secure.
Yeah, that's really good, actually. And that's partly why we are in August with this, because the alternative was having self-custody, which is what we talked about, and I didn't want that personally at all. So I'm very glad that we waited and got this done right. So talking about getting it right, we've done a ton of testing, as you know. We've done 2 audits, 4 audits, if you like, including the final audits from M Labs and TX, which is great. They're publicly available to look at as well, and they're signed and hashed as well, so they're backed up. And then, of course, all the mainnet testing we did, and I think you're probably better to speak about the mainnet tests.
Yeah. So, it was really just
And Santronet testing as well before that.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really just defense in depth, right? So it started with, I wrote the smart contracts, and then I wrote a suite of 170 different tests, kind of every permutation I could think of, and anytime. Well, I'll get to that in a second. So like wrote all these tests, and they weren't unit tests in the sense that like they tested it end to end. They built a transaction and evaluated would this transaction have passed the ledger rules. And so we knew we had really high confidence that we could build both that these transactions would get accepted, and we have tests that say if somebody tries to build this transaction, does it get rejected, right? And so really fleshing that out. Then we went into 2 independent audits with different companies that weren't talking. So TX Pipe did an audit, and M Labs did an audit, and they found several issues that every time they found an issue, I would go and write a test to confirm, and I'd show them the test, and I'd say, "Is this the issue you're talking about?" And they'd say yes, or they'd say, "No, actually, you misinterpreted what we wrote." So like it's a really good way to get hyper precise about that finding, but what they identified. And then once I had that test, I fixed the issue. And you can, if you go back in the Git history, sometimes they got bundled together or whatever, but you can really see that history of how we added those. Then they did the follow-up audit, which is, okay, were these issues fixed, and did that introduce any new issues? And they produced that final report. Then we did a bunch of testing on preview. We did, and the way the contracts work, you can put money into them. The hard part to test was the Treasury withdrawal. Make sure that process worked.
Yeah.
Because like...
You can only do that on mainnet, right?
Mainnet, preview and pre-prod, you can do it on all 3, but it takes 30 days.
Yeah.
Right? And so it would have taken us 30 days to test that. So we actually, together with the people running SanchoNet, and we ran an actual 1 million SanchoNet ADA withdrawal into the contract.
Like one-day epochs around Sancho.
Yeah. So we were able to kind of get really quick turnaround time there. Then we did one mainnet test where we made sure the contracts work on mainnet. And then, right, if that wasn't enough, once we had all of the permissions from you and all the parameters that you were going to go with, we compiled those contracts down, or we compiled them, we registered them on the network, the ones that were actually going to be and now are being used for the Treasury withdrawal. And we did one more round of testing with that to make sure like this particular script hash all the way down, we know the full loop.
And even testing credentials, right?
Yeah. We had to get those people to sign it and make sure, and we actually discovered somebody had gotten their credentials backwards, and and so that's not an issue. It's just like really making sure people fully test everything so that we know, okay, this person's using their secondary key instead of their primary key, and things like that is really important.
Yeah, I think. When you talk about that, the volume of testing there was a lot of people involved, from the Intersect side, of course, from you guys, but also input-output engineering team were heavily involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
This right from the beginning. So, a lot of their desires to see how this would unfold for Cardano was really shown through. It's been an incredible journey so far. I'm really excited about how we're moving forward here, and I mean, all of the ideas you suggested sound amazing. I'd love to sort of see how they feel with the rest of the community. And like, there's also a feature backlog. I know we want to try and wrap up here, but there's a feature backlog, right? Anyone come in and request it.
Yeah, and that's mostly for the dashboard that we've built.
Yes.
There's no change in the contracts now, but the dashboard is the kind of third component that we built. But yeah, so we're going to be improving that and really making it transparent and accessible to the community so they know where those funds are and what they're being used for.
All right, well, thank you. Thanks for joining us. I've been Jack, and this is Pi. Enjoy the rest of Rare.